me, I think I realized after an emotional message for me talking about uncertainty in life as it comes, certainly in our life, things are a little uncertain right now as we're moving. Have a lot of changes in our life, new schools for the kids, and ABF is this next weekend, that's a lot going on. And as we walk away from that and we move to talk about obedience, because I think really I thought about making it a series because I think they go so well together, but I want us to really get focused on obedience today. I think obedience is what happens, that's our response to times of uncertainty. We discussed last week that God is our solid foundation, really the only solid thing that we can cling to in those times of uncertainty. And because of that, our response is to be obedient to what He's told us to do. We're going to explore that today. I don't know if we said or not, kids are dismissed to go to children's church. I see Stephanie rounding you up. If there's any stragglers, and you guys can head on out. We're going to be looking at Joshua, chapter 7. There's a lot here historically, so let me just kind of set up the stage, if you will, so we can discuss this with some level of intelligence. The Israelites have been snuck in by Rahab. They've kind of sought out information and via the spy network of how things are in the land in which they're about to take. They have captured and destroyed Jericho. The story of surrounding the walls and being obedient in what God told them to do, and they had a great military victory. Now they move on in the next chapter past that and begin to get into trouble right away. We begin to see what happens when we fail to have obedience, and that's where the story kind of picks up. And there is a city called Ai. So if you're looking at that, it says A, capital A, lowercase I, and you're wondering, how do you say that? It's just I, which can be a little confusing with the word I. So we'll hopefully not get too confused on that. So after feeling very confident, probably overconfident from their victory, then they begin to kind of think, wow, man, it was because of our military might, it was because of our shrewdness and such that we gained this victory, and God had given some very specific instructions on what was to happen. And He had told them very specifically that there were things that you may not take from those cities. They are to be destroyed. And if you think about this in our context, that this is a very typical of God helping us, just as if we were children, just like we help our children to avoid temptation, to avoid problems, to avoid struggle. And He helps us by saying, don't do that. All right? How many times in my life have I said, and have I heard as a child, but as a parent, don't do that? I don't know, millions might be an exaggeration, definitely hundreds of thousands of times. So I think we're familiar with that. A lot of us don't like to hear, don't do that. But God does that to protect us. He does that because He sees danger, and it makes sense, right? Because He sees the future, He knows human nature, He knows how things turn out in life. After all, He created things the way that they are. He understands the consequences of sin and the damage that sin does in our lives. And so He is trying to help the Israelites as they take the promised land and as they begin to fulfill their call as a nation and as a superpower at the time, or preceding that time. Then He says there are certain things that you can't take. Don't take all the spoils of war like all their pagan, nation, city-states at that time. That's kind of what you did. You went to a city, sacked the city, took all the cool stuff, and headed out. And also, they're going for tablets and phones and all that. Actually, it was like gold and silver and that kind of stuff. And so, in verse 7 is where we're going to kind of pick it up here. Verse 1 of chapter 7. It says, the Israelites were unfaithful regarding the things set apart for destruction. Achan, son of Carmi, son of Zabdi, son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, took some of what was set apart. And the Lord's anger burned against the Israelites. And one thing I want you to note here, God wasn't just unhappy with a certain individual. Right? We see that right there in the end of that statement. his anger burned against the Israelites. So one person's sin, one person's disobedience affected everybody. And I would love to say, in a perfectly fair and just situation, that that's how life is. And as we all know, we suffer the consequences of other people's sin. They suffer the consequences of our sin. And so that's not strange to us. When you have a bad boss at work, when you have a bad teacher, when you have whatever leader in your life that is leading you off a cliff, everybody in your group, this is I guess particularly true in the military, everybody in your unit is going to be in trouble. And if you not being in the military myself, the only information I have is what I read and what I see in movies and things, but I know that from several of you that have served, one of the things that comes up a lot is you have an inexperienced officer out in the field, and they can get their men in a lot of trouble, get them killed, get them hurt, because of poor leadership, because they didn't stick to the plan, they weren't disciplined, they panicked, and made bad choices. And so here we have this Achan, son of Carmi, who has caused a lot of problems, or is about to cause a lot of problems. So Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai, which is near Beth-Haven, east of Bethel, and he told them, "Go up and scout the land." So the men went up and scouted Ai. And after returning to Joshua, they reported to him, "Don't send all the people, but send about 2,000 or 3,000 men to attack Ai. And since the people of Ai are so few, don't wear out all of our people there." So about 3,000 men went up from there, but they fled from the men of Ai. And the men of Ai struck down about 36 of them and chased them from outside the gates to the quarries, striking them down on the descent. And as a result, the people's hearts melted and became like water. So the Israelites had disobeyed God. They lost His blessing. They got overconfident to send out part of their force. Oh man, we're just going to go wipe them out, no big deal. Joshua says, take 2,000 or 3,000 men, go attack them, and boom, they're defeated, they're running away, they're afraid. In verse 6, we see Joshua's response, which is the right response. It says, "Then Joshua tore his clothes, and he fell before the ark of the Lord with his face to the ground until evening. As did the elders of Israel, they all put dust on their heads." So he was repentant. He realized right away that there was a problem, and he humbled himself before God. And see, there is a moment for many of us where we get ourselves in trouble, we've made a mistake, and at that moment we just harden our heart and we just move on, and we're like, well, that's life, I'm going to keep going my own way, and maybe I'll get a different result. I'll just keep going my own way, I'll keep disobeying God, and if I do that long enough, maybe it'll all work out. And so, at least at this point, there was repentance. Joshua's heart was right, and he led the elders and those to humble themselves and recognize there was a problem. So some things happen, and now Joshua, as we fast forward to verse 20, he confronts this individual, and we'll see what has happened. Achan replied to Joshua, "It's true. I have sinned against the Lord, the God of Israel, and this is what I did. When I saw among the spoils a beautiful cloak from Babylon, 200 silver shekels, and a bar of gold weighing 50 shekels, I coveted them and took them." Classic case, right? We covet it first. We see whatever it is. And right now, my phone contract is getting ready to come up in September. And the Galaxy, which one? It's the tablet, like Alan, Deanna, what kind do you have? You have the 4. What is it though? It's a, yeah, I know it's a phablet, but Note, thank you, yes. The Note 5 is getting ready to come out in September. And I have to say, I've been tempted with some covetousness of the Galaxy 5, and perhaps I will acquire it in a non-sinful manner. I will consider whether or not the Lord will allow me to have this device. I guess it depends on what I do with it. And so we desire something, we want something, and then we begin to obsess over it, and at some point we begin to break God's laws, And that's when we get ourselves into trouble. Now, I want to note here in this, it's not like God is sitting up there and it's like, well, I'm waiting for the Israelites to mess up so I can smite them. Remember, God's the one who's freedom from slavery. God's the one that said, I'm going to make you, of course, we saw when we looked at his promises to Abraham recently, I'm going to make you into a great nation. This whole idea is God's idea. He's sent them on this mission. He's given them a great success at the beginning as they begin their military campaign. And all he's saying is, whoa, time out. If you depart from the plan, if you depart from the way of good here, then you're going to fail. And so he doesn't let them get off the path. And there are times in my life where I wish God would do that for me even sooner than he does. Because I'll start getting off the path, and pretty soon I'm in the woods and I have no idea where the path even is. And something terrible, some great calamity has to strike me and kind of get me back on the path. So I think that's a good thing. That's my perspective anyway. Maybe you have a different perspective. But for me, I see that as a help. As God saying, you know what? It's kind of like, when you're younger and you go bowling, there's those inflatable deals in the alleys. Or I don't know. Whatever you what? Bumpers. Thank you. Yeah, and you can roll the ball, and even if you go straight over to the gutter, it bounces off the bumper, and eventually the ball ends down at the end. I wish that life was more like that at times, but I think it can be if we will trust God and we'll stay focused on that. He's kind of like those bumpers; He keeps us from getting off, getting too crazy. So he coveted these things. There's the spoils of war. Doesn't sound too exciting to me necessarily, but at the time, I'm sure, that was a highly sought-after thing, a cloak that was Babylonian, and all this money, of course, certainly, the love of money has been a problem since the dawn of commerce. And so he took them. And he says, as we go on in verse 21, you can see for yourself, they are concealed in the ground, inside my tent, with the money under the cloak. So Joshua sent messengers who ran to the tent, and there was the cloak, concealed in his tent with the money underneath. And they took the things from inside the tent and brought them to Joshua and all the Israelites, and spread them out in the Lord's presence. Then Joshua and all Israel with him took Achan, I think I've been saying wrong, I think it's Achan, son of Zerah, the silver, the cloak, and the bar of gold, his sons and daughters, his ox, his donkey, his sheep, his tent, basically everything that he had, all right, not just those items, everything, and brought them up to the valley of Achan. Joshua said, why have you troubled us? Today the Lord will trouble you. And all Israel stoned him to death. So he brought destruction upon not just himself, but his whole house. And the reason I keep pointing out this theme is because we'll see this 3 or 4 times just in this one story of how our sin, our failure to humble ourselves, to fear God, is really at the birth of that. Solomon says that fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. At the beginning of staying on the right path is fearing God, and the reaction of that is obedience. So he was disobedient. His nation suffered, his family suffered, and everything that he had was taken away. So now we move to chapter 8, and things begin to go better. Let's read this and see what happens. Beginning in verse 1. The Lord said to Joshua, don't be afraid or discouraged. Take the whole military force with you and go attack Ai. Okay, so different plan this time. It's like, okay, we're not going to let these guys go party over here. We're all going. We're all going. Look, I have handed over to you the king of Ai, his people, city, and land. All right, so this is God's promise. Treat Ai and its king as you did Jericho and its king. You may plunder its spoil and livestock for yourselves, and set an ambush behind the city. All right, so God has laid out strategy here. Now it's going to be up to the Israelites to see if this time they can stay on the right path. They can stick to the strategy. So Joshua and the whole military force set out to attack Ai. Joshua selected 30,000 fighting men and sent them out at night. And he commanded them, pay attention, lie in ambush behind the city, not too far from it, and all of you will be ready. Then I and all the people who are with me will approach the city. And when they come out against us, as they did the first time, we will flee from them. They will come after us, and until we have drawn them away from the city, and they will say, they are fleeing from us as before. And while we are fleeing from them, you are to come out of your ambush and seize the city. For the Lord your God has handed it over to you. And after taking the city, set it on fire. Follow the Lord's command. See that you do as I have ordered you. So Joshua sent them out, and they went to the ambush site and waited between Bethel and Ai, to the west of Ai, and he spent the night with his troops. You need to understand something about what God's asking. You may think, okay, well that sounds easy. What's hard about that? But you need to remember that the Israelites have wandered in the wilderness for a very long time. They were slaves before. They have really no home. Not even their ancestors can really remember a time that they had their own city, their own home. And here God has had them destroy 2 entire cities, and they're still going to be homeless after this. So this is a big deal, because what they could do is go in and wipe them out and live there. Have a home. Be done with the wandering and the later they're going to build the temple instead of having the tabernacle all the time. They've got to carry around and put up and take down. And so it's a big deal. It's really hard for there's this carrot dangling out here, and God's saying, not yet, not yet. You need to burn it. You need to destroy it. Now later we find out that because of all the idol worship and the evil that all of these city-states and these nations have done, that their culture, their idols, all of it needs to be wiped out. All right, needs to be removed so that God's nation can be established. And so that righteousness can again prevail. And so there can be law and order and goodness in the area. But at the time, I can only imagine being one of those soldiers, and I've got my family that's traveling with me, and I'm putting my life on the line, and now God's saying, you're going to go and you're going to conquer the city, but you can't take it, you can't live there, you're going to destroy it. It'll be pretty hard. It'll be pretty hard. So let's see what they do. Joshua started early the next morning and he mobilized them. He and the elders of Israel led the troops to Ai. Notice something there. They were out in front. It's leaders lead. They led out. They didn't stand behind and say, okay, you guys go and fight the war while we hang out. But they led them out. They were with them. I think it's significant because when we look at verse 9, it says he even spent the night with his troops. And they did it together. All those who were with him went up and approached the city, arriving opposite Ai and camped to the north, with a valley between them and the city. Joshua had taken about 5,000 men and set them in ambush between Bethel and Ai to the west of the city. All right, that's the force that's going to move in. So after, if I know some of this can be a little confusing. So basically, one part of the army is going to hide, and the other army is going to draw them out. And they're hoping that the men of Ai will run after them, and it'll leave the city vulnerable, and they're going to go in and destroy it. Right? Everybody kind of got the general idea. Okay, all right. I know that not everyone's quite into battle strategy and such, like I am. Okay. So the military force was stationed in this way, and the men camped to the north of the city, and its rear guard to the west. And that night Joshua went into the battle. And when the king of Ai saw the Israelites, the men of the city hurried and went out early in the morning, so that he and all his people could engage Israel in battle and awaiting at a suitable place facing the arrow. But he did not know that there was an ambush waiting for him behind the city. So Joshua and all Israel pretended to be beaten back by them, and they fled towards the wilderness. All right, so far their ruse is working. And all the troops of Ai were summoned to pursue them, and they pursued Joshua and were drawn away from the city. Not a man was left in Ai or Bethel who did not go out after Israel, leaving the city exposed while they were in pursuit. And the Lord said to Joshua, hold out the sword in your hand toward Ai, for I will hand the city over to you. And Joshua held out his sword towards it. And when he held out his hand, the men in ambush rose quickly from their position. They ran, entered the city, captured it, and immediately set it on fire. Notice the word immediately. If you digitally underline, you have a pencil and underline that. They didn't go in there and be like, well, it's pretty nice in here. A lot of nice animal skins, nice and warm and cozy, big walls, protect us. Maybe we should just kind of think about it for a while. And then if we decide that we should burn it, I mean, sounds reasonable, right? You should try it. Try it out and see. Some people will like it. Just kind of play with the sin a little bit, and see, well, let's see if God smites us, and then we'll burn it real fast. If just like that. They immediately did it. All right, they didn't hesitate. They didn't play around with it. They just said, "All right, this is what God told us to do. Let's do it." The men of Ai turned and they looked back, and smoke from the city was rising to the sky. They could not escape in any direction, and the troops who had fled to the wilderness now became the pursuers. All right, so Joshua's army, now the Israelite army, turned and they went back and faced the army that was trailing them. So that's what he's talking about. Now they are becoming the pursued instead of the pursuers. When Joshua and all Israel saw that the men in ambush had captured the city, and the smoke was rising from it, they turned back and struck down the men of Ai. Then men in ambush came out of the city against them, and the men of Ai were trapped between the Israelite forces, some on one side and some on the other. And they struck them down until no survivor or fugitive remained. And they captured the king of Ai alive and brought him to Joshua. When Israel had finished killing everyone living in Ai, who had pursued them into the open country, and when every last one of them had fallen by the sword, all Israel returned to Ai and struck it down with the sword. The total of those who fell that day, both men and women, was 12,000. Or, in other words, all the people of Ai. And Joshua did not draw back his hand that was holding the sword until all the inhabitants of Ai were completely destroyed. And Israel plundered only the cattle and spoil of the city for themselves, according to the Lord's command that he had given Joshua. And Joshua burned Ai and left it a permanent ruin, desolate to this day, as of the writing of the book of Joshua. So I know that was a lot to read, and I know a lot of times in sermons, we just read a few verses, and so we read almost 2 whole chapters. But I think it's important for us not just to pick out the things that we like, but to read the whole story and make sure we understand fully the account that's been left for us. And let's discuss it now a little bit. Obedience is hard because it forces us to lay down our desires, our will, in favor of someone else's. Right? So when we're kids, that's our parents often. Right? We want to play World of Warcraft at 9:01 p.m. and parents say, "Nope, at 9 o'clock, we're going to go to bed, turn it off." So we have a choice whether or not to be obedient. Our boss says, "I need all these reports on my desk by 8:10 a.m. on Tuesday," and that may seem impossible, but we attempt to do that and accomplish that because the authority over us has told us to do that. And obedience is really challenging. Instant obedience is even more difficult. Because we like to kind of weigh it and consider, well, in our house, in our home, respect for authority is a big deal. I would imagine that if you interviewed my children, they would tell you that they're tired of hearing lectures about respecting authority, and they're tired of punishments that ensue because of a lack of respect for authority. Although I do think we've made a lot of progress over the last many years. I'm proud of my children. It's not easy for any of us, whether you are 15 or whether you are 45 or 85. We all have an authority over us. Ultimately, God is the authority over us. And He's laid out for us a path that the Bible refers to as the narrow path that leads to life. And then there is the path that is wide and broad and that leads to destruction. And ultimately, in life, those are really the only two choices. We can talk a lot about all the options, but at the end of the day, those are really the two choices. We can either follow the path that God has for us, we can just be obedient, even when it doesn't make sense, even though we desire something different, or we can just go our own way and walk down the path that's broad and that's wide. And logically, I think we could probably all stand here and agree that it makes a lot more sense to follow the narrow path. And just from a purely logical perspective, let's just explore that. How many of you know what's going to happen in the next 60 seconds? really disappointing. I was really hoping there was someone with some kind of superhero-like powers that could... Oh, that's okay. Maybe next week. But not one of us. We can walk out of church today and see a mushroom cloud in the distance, or an EMP pulse, or anything could happen in the next 60 seconds, and not one of us has any idea. Maybe nothing would happen. No idea. And so, I think the wise man, the wise woman says, because of that, because God does know, we're going to follow, we're going to be obedient to that path, because He knows what's ahead. He knows infinitely all of the cause and effects of all of my choices before I ever make those choices. And yet, we find ourselves on the broad pathway. Because of fear, because of uncertainty, because we lack the faith, we lack the trust, we forget how God's delivered us to this point in our life, and so we say, well, I don't know. We start doubting, we covet something, we see something we want, and we say, man, I want that, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to get that. Even though we have no idea the future, we look around us and we see all of our friends, our family, we see the choices that they make, some of them good, some of them bad. We understand, many of us, the consequences of sin, the consequences of rebellion, and yet, we still choose to flee righteousness. And I think in the story of Joshua, and as we could spend a lot of time looking at all of the process of them establishing their own nation and of ridding that area of child sacrifice and all manner of evil that existed in the land before God brought them into that place. I think we would see, of course, looking back on it, it's much easier for us to see that the times they were faithful, and that they obeyed God, that they feared Him, they experienced a season of blessing and of good things happening. And when they chose not to do that, they experienced the consequences of that. So like us. So like them. I can remember when I was much younger, I just didn't understand a lot of times the Old Testament. I didn't understand why it was in the Bible. I didn't understand what lessons it possibly could teach us, and it took me a while to realize how consistent all of it is. When we take time to go back and look at it and realize that the lessons that are there are the lessons that we have to grab and take hold of. And I don't know if it's because culturally history is not a very popular subject, or if it's because our attention span is so small we can't really sit and listen and learn and understand. But history is really the only thing that we have to use as a tool to make better decisions in the future. And if you think of it, the Bible is a great book of history. It's not only the inspired and inerrant Word of God, but it's a book of history. It's a book of all the people that have lived before us and what they did. Some of them made great choices. Some of them made terrible choices. We can choose to learn from that, or we can choose to be ignorant and never read it and never understand what's happening. Or we can choose to read it, understand it, embrace those truths, deny the flesh, and follow God. And it's tough, I understand. Being obedient once or twice, 30 minutes a day, once a week, it's pretty doable. It's pretty doable. But to be faithful, to be consistent, what am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about loving your enemies. I'm talking about responding to people who are angry and hateful and mean with kindness, with gentleness. I'm talking about being self-controlled. Those are pretty tough things. We can do that occasionally. Anybody can do that occasionally. But to do that consistently, every day, I find that is the greatest challenge of my life, is to consistently follow God. I find I can follow God at times, especially when something happens and I get excited and passionate, but consistently, every day. Even when I'm kind of in that, I don't know if you're like me, but I find myself a lot of times surrounded by godlessness. Just completely surrounded by godlessness. People that have no fear of God, no concept of morality, of absolute right and wrong. And in those moments I feel like I'm like from another planet. I just look around and I wonder and I ask myself, how did I ever get in this situation? And I know that I've talked with many of you. I know that some of your work situations, your school situations are like that. And that's how the Israelites were in this story. They found themselves surrounded by godlessness, surrounded by people that sacrificed their children to idols, to gods, to fictional gods and goddesses. They abused women terribly. The law and order was barely there, if any. It was a terrible situation. And the temptation is there, just like it was with Achan. The temptation is there to embrace that, to look at that part of sin that looks good, tastes good. I liken it to, and I've used this illustration before, but I like it to eating pizza. Which, let's see, for those of you who ate pizza at lunch, this is going to cause you to feel a little bit guilty, but just don't take it further than it's intended. But pizza just looks so good when it comes out of the oven, when it's fresh and it's sizzling and everything. You're not really processing how much saturated fat is in that pizza, right? And so it looks good, it tastes good, it smells good, we eat it, and then, by and large, after eating many slices and not a lot of exercise, these round things start growing. Not really sure what the deal is with that. I think they call it fat. I don't know. I've tried to deny that fat exists, but that hasn't worked for me so far. So there's a consequence to that. It looks good, but at the end of the day, it's really not good for me. And it's kind of an oversimplification. It's not the end of the world if we have a little bit of excess body fat. Unless you're competing in some kind of a bodybuilding competition, then that would be bad. That would be the end of the world. But for most of us. But there are sin in the world that God is very clear about. He's very clear about, and I think we can look at some of these things in the Ten Commandments in the context of our story. Thou shalt not covet. What did Achan do? He coveted. So, and to covet, coveting is not like you want something. We all want things. Coveting is when we act on it. We make a decision to do something, even though we know that God has said no. See, that's kind of this. If you're trying to figure out, well, where's the line there? When is it where I'm just tempted? So like if I'm at Lowe's and I kind of walk by the hardware section, like the one here in Ozark, if you come in the contractor doors, you turn right, it's all along there. So you have to be really careful when I walk down that section. I look over and I see all those nice tools, and they look really shiny. You got the yellow DeWalt tools, and you got the green Hitachi tools. Just got all these really nice tools. I think, I've got this project, and I'm pretty sure I could use this tool, or you think, no, I need, and so there's that moment of temptation, all right? And let's assume for the moment that my wife has not authorized me to purchase any of these tools, okay? So that's the line, all right? She really enjoys it when I mention her sermons, just for the record. She really likes that. She just makes her smile. Or not. And so when I entertain that there, and I'm thinking, I'm tempted by that, that is the line. See, and it's what I do after that that will cause me to covet. If I cross the line and I start looking and thinking, this is nice, and I pick it up and I hold it, and I'm thinking about how I might pay for it, I'm thinking about, the top 10 arguments that I'm going to make when I get home of, well, here's why I bought this tool. Now I've crossed the line. I begin to covet that. I begin to dwell there. And then if I purchase that item and take it home, again, not the end of the world, not perhaps a life-changing decision, although it can be if I charge it on a credit card and I can't pay the balance. But there are many things in life, many things in life like that. And we are tempted by it, and then we stay there. We're not like the Israelites where we immediately do what God said in the story. They immediately set fire. But we just kind of camp there and we play with it. We mess around with it, and we shouldn't. And that's when we put ourselves in a place where God can tempt us, or when Satan can tempt us, where we can get into that temptation and begin to cause problems for ourselves. I know that many are struggling with hardship and difficulties of all different kinds right now. And sometimes at the end of the day, when I think back in my life, when I'm at those places, which seems to not be, there seems to be less and less distance between those times as time goes on for some reason. But I realize that sometimes at the end of the day, all I really have is God. It's really, that everything seems so fragile and so uncertain in my life, that all I really have is God. All I really have is my obedience, my worship, my willingness to give up my life to follow after Him. Sometimes that's really all that I feel like, I guess I should say. It's all that I feel like I have. And something that God's really helped me realize lately is that actually, all of the time, that's really all that I have. I just want you to dwell with me for a minute. We're going to close with this thought. But really, even when everything seems great and it seems like, man, I've got this and I've got that and my career's going great, and that is a false security. I would suggest to you to consider that. That confidence that you have in that job, in that car, in that business, whatever it is, it's a false security. Really, at the end of the day, God is the only thing that will sustain us. Last week we got to this point, I think, as we dealt with uncertainty. And I think the lie is that in life, all the material things that we have around us, all the desires, all the temptations, they cause us to get this false sense of thinking that everything is just going to work out perfectly the way we want it to. I mean, Joshua and the Israelites, they were so confident in their victory after Jericho. They just sent out 2,000 or 3,000 men just thinking, oh, well, God's going to make this easy, and we're going to lift up our sword and they're all going to fall down. So I would challenge you today, if maybe the reason why you're struggling to be obedient, and there's a lot of different ways to be disobedient. We can steal from God by not giving our tithe, by not giving our time. We can give into sin and let it rule our lives, and we can let addictions and things overcome us. And there's so many ways that we can be disobedient. I don't think you know what they are. I don't think I need to list those. And I believe that the Holy Spirit also convicts us when we're in those places. But perhaps today, one of the reasons why we struggle so much with that is because we're too overconfident in this world. Too overconfident in waking up one day and thinking, oh, well, I'm going to get my toaster waffles at Walmart. I'm going to get my paycheck from my job. I'm going to go out and start my car and drive, and we just count on these things, and then someday those things aren't there for us because we've relied on them too heavily. Perhaps today is a day where some of us, we need to say, you know what, God, I need to rely on you instead of all these things in life. Sometimes it's a happiness issue that we're relying on our circumstances to make us happy. I get caught up in this temptation all the time. And if I just have these things and I have my little list of things that I want, and if I can have those things, then it'll make me happy. And then ultimately, one or all of those things fail, and guess what? I'm unhappy because that's what I was counting on. But here's the thing: if we just trust in God, if we'll just be obedient to His plan for our lives, happiness is always at the end of that road because it's based on something simple. Let's pray. God, thank you for today. Thank you for the faithful people that have come to hear your word, to worship you, to share in fellowship today. I thank you for every single person in this room right now. God, I thank you that you have given us promises, just like you gave Joshua and the Israelites as they were coming into the promised land. That you've promised us that you will never leave us or forsake us. You've promised us that you will provide for us, that we will not perish till it is our time to come and be with you in heaven. And God, I pray that as we are challenged with this extremely high standard of obedience, not just to be obedient once a week or once a day, consistently, but I pray that you would give us the courage and the strength that you would give us the humility that Joshua had as he humbled himself before you, brought his nation to repent and to turn to you. God, I recognize that our nation is the same problem. We've gone our own way. We've decided what is best for us, and we have abandoned your moral laws. We have abandoned right and wrong. We have abandoned so many things that have kept us on the right path for so many years. And I pray, Lord, that perhaps this year, by some miracle, we as a nation will repent. There would be another great awakening, another time of people recognizing that this broad path of destruction that we are on can only end in death and sadness and despair. And I just pray, Lord, that as we get up tomorrow, as we face the hardships of the day, the struggles of the day, even if we've failed 1,000 times before, that your grace and your mercy would be sufficient to carry us through. We just thank you and ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you guys so much for being here today. It's just an encouragement to share this time.